it's a rough life. Living up to Lassie, it's a rough life. Trying to be so classy when I'm going through the garbage for a midday snack. Knowing I'm in trouble when the folks get back. It's a rough life. When fleas live on your belly, it's a rough life. When people call you smelly, I'm developing a complex. I might need a shrink. They blame me every time that something starts to stink. It's a rough life. Begging for a cookie is a rough life. Never getting nookie. They chase me from the kitchen when I start to beg. They think that I'm perverted when I hug their leg.
Hi, welcome to the show. My name is Jesse Goldberg, and today is part 2 of the Steve Karr show. Steve is an attorney here in Nashville, and he's written or co-written a lot of books here. Oh, you wrote the motorcycle book too?
Oh yeah, got a motorcycle book too. We wrote that after the personal injury book.
Right. So you got these little books here. One is called, one we're going to talk about today is Tennessee Workers' Comp. It's like a little guide on it. And we have one called the Motorcycle Handbook. I remember reading that in the bathroom. I read all these in the bathroom. Maybe we could show some of them, Cameron. We'll show them right now. Here's the personal injury book. And it's like a hand guide to personal injury cases in...
How to handle your own case if you really want to.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it is.
But you don't really handle your own case because nobody takes it seriously if you do. There you go. Leave the camera there. I'll leave it here. Personal injury case. Here's the workers' comp case. Workers' comp book. And you give these books out at your office,
sure.
Right?
You just call the office. Call our phone number.
Motorcycle book. Motorcycle book. All written very simple, very easy to read. Here we go. Gotcha. Okay. So let's get to workers' comp. Now, let's talk about you first. Let's review.
All right.
Where are you from?
I'm from Nashville. Grew up here. Went to Hillwood High School. Went to Vanderbilt University.
You went to Hillwood High School?
Hillwood High School. Graduated in 1972.
They're closing Hillwood High School.
Yeah, they're getting ready to close it and going to move it out to Bellevue, I think, out near our church, I think, someplace.
Yeah, there's a whole property out there.
Right. Yeah, and I'm going to be very sad to see that school go, but
the Roaches won't be sad
too. They won't. I think what they're going to do is put a big development out there, over where Hillwood is. Probably a, big condominium. What else,
The lands are worth a lot of money.
A lot of money. Went to Vanderbilt. Graduated from Vanderbilt. Went to the Nashville School of Law and.
Right after Vanderbilt?
Right, and passed the bar in 1981, and from then it's just been law since 1981.
What did you start out as?
When I started practicing, I had a job with the Tennessee Parole Board. I was like a hearing officer. And then when that sort of ended after about 4 or 5 years, I had to go out and find something to do. So I just hung out a shingle and started doing everything. Family law, criminal law,
Tennessee Parole Board, what was that job like?
That was very interesting. Sitting across the table from convicted felons and helping the board make certain decisions on whether or not someone should be paroled. Most of the things I helped them do had to do with clemency. I would write papers on whether or not someone should be granted clemency. I dig into the case, look at the background, look and see what the court said about it. And then sort of gave an opinion on, whether or not this guy should be given a clemency, if sentence should be commuted, that sort of thing, basically. And then after that, it was on to, hanging the shingle and doing the other things. I got into a lot of juvenile law, got into a lot of family practice, got into personal injury law, and then got into workers' comp law. And then I guess by about 1987, I had enough of doing everything. And I said, I got to really sit down. I got to start doing something,
Specialize in
I can do one thing. And so I said, okay, this is it. It's personal injury and workers' comp. And that's the way it's been ever since. So there you have it.
All right, let's talk about what's the difference between workers' comp and personal injury?
Okay. The workers' compensation system is a no-fault system. What that means is this. If you get hurt on the job, you don't have to prove that it's anybody's fault.
Hold on, before you keep going. Do you have to join something to be a union or something to be a workers' comp? Anybody?
No, anybody.
Anybody, okay.
If I work for Macy's, or if I work for...
You work for anybody?
If I work for Kroger,
And if you
any
get hurt on the
store,
job, you got a workers' comp claim.
I have a workers'
Okay,
compensation
now
claim.
keep going.
Okay. Now that's in a general sense, okay? On the personal injury side, you have to prove fault. You have to prove that someone was negligent. And if you can't prove that someone was negligent, then
Hold on,
you
I'm
lose.
taking this label off.
Right. Then you lose your right to your claim. So that's the general difference between a personal injury case and a workers' compensation case. Workers' comp has changed though. in
So if
Tennessee.
if I'm working at a job, workers' comp, there's the camera guy falls off the ladder or something. Do you have to be employed by the guy, or could it be an independent contractor?
Big difference. If you're an independent contractor, you may not be covered. Now there are ways to get around that too. Depends on.
You might not cover workers' comp, but you might be covered for personal injury. If somebody shows negligence.
Maybe if you can prove negligence on the
Right.
part of the person that you're working with.
Right.
But there are ways of getting around that independent contractor thing too. I mean, it depends on how you're paid, who controls your work. In other words, if you only work for that particular person all the time and they tell you what time to show up and you use their equipment and that sort of thing, you know, it's going to be difficult for them to say, well, he is not an employee, he's an independent contractor. Court might say, he's an employee because of the right
Right.
to control.
Right.
So
That's one
there's
of
your
the
big
things that you would
difference.
argue if he was an independent contractor, but he's acting like an employee.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, so what works is in between workers' comp. Okay, say I fall off the ladder. What do I do next?
If I fall off the ladder,
I break my arm.
fall off the ladder, and let's assume that we're under the new law, which began in July of 2014. What I do is, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to report it to my supervisor. And theoretically, I have 15 days to do that. Okay, it used to be 30, now it's 15. If you don't give notice within 15 days, they may use that, they meaning the employer, might use that as a defense to not pay you your workers' compensation claim. Notice defenses are very rare and win very rarely. Okay, it would almost have to be a situation where you waited 6 months before you gave anybody notice.
You just have to notice that you got injured, or notice that you filed a claim.
You notify your employer that you got hurt,
Okay.
and then your employer, within 2 or 3 days, is supposed to give you a panel of doctors, okay, to pick from.
As long as you go to the guy, you say, "I'm hurt." Of course, they're going to get hurt. And just okay, I get you. Go.
You hope they do that.
Right.
You hope they do that, but it's become a lot more complicated than that. But once you pick that doctor, provided you're lucky enough to get that panel from the insurance company, then that doctor becomes your authorized treating physician, or ATP as we call him.
Okay.
Okay, and his or her opinion is going to be very important as to determine whether or not it's a work-related accident or not, and whether or not you're going to have any permanent impairment or not, or whether you're entitled to any more medical benefits or not. Those are all things that the authorized treating physician is going to make determinations about. The law changed in 2014, and here's what it did, and this is very, very critical. First of all, it took workers' compensation out of the state court systems. In other words, in the old days, if I wanted to file a lawsuit, I would file a lawsuit in the circuit court or in the chancery court for Davidson County. In July of 2014, that all changed. The Tennessee Bureau of Workers' Compensation grew from this new law, and there were 12 judges that were selected to start this new system. There are 12 judges all over the state of Tennessee, and it's broken up in divisions. And in the book, you'll see that there's a map, and in the map it shows you sort of the location of where your case could be heard depending upon where you live.
Right. So it's like a court system without the courts. Different.
It's administrative.
Right. Administrative,
It's
right, yeah.
right. Another big difference is it used to be that if the worker got hurt, more times than not, you know the old saying in baseball, the tie goes to the runner.
Right.
If the worker got hurt and there was some question as to whether or not it was a work injury, the tie went to the worker. Not anymore. It's now a system based upon a level playing field, okay, where the insurance company and the employer are on the same level playing field as the employee. As a practical matter, I don't believe that, but you know.
So now we're talking about only injuries that's not caused by the worker. What if the worker's fooling around or something like that and gets injured anyway?
Horseplay. Okay.
That's what it's
That's
called?
called horseplay. And if someone's fooling around on the job, the employer, the insurance company, is going to defend on the issue of horseplay. And that if they can prove it, they'll win. They'll win on that issue. Happens. It's rare, but it does happen.
Right. But they still have, I remember when I studied this stuff, or not studied it, but I think I read about it. I was because I did personal injury. So, but in workers' comp, like an arm was worth something, a leg was worth something. Or, you know, is that still the way it works?
Well, yeah. The way it works now is this: if you have an injury to any body part, the doctor has to rate it to the whole body. Okay, so there's something now called the AMA guidelines. We are now using the AMA guidelines 6th edition. The doctor will then look at the guidelines, whether it's to your arm or to your leg or to your foot or to whatever body part it is. He'll rate you to that body part, and then he has to use a conversion table to convert that to the body as a whole. And that's how your settlement, or that's one of the elements as to how your settlement is reached. Another element is the number 450 weeks. That's the new number that the legislature came up with in terms of how to calculate what someone's settlement should be. The other critical number...
Wait.
Yeah.
450 weeks, they multiplied times what your salary would have been?
Yeah, here's how that works.
How much is 450 weeks?
Let's say you
10
have...
years or something?
Let's say,
9 years?
let's say you have a 4% impairment to the body as a whole, okay? And...
Permanent, we're talking about?
Yeah, permanent injury to the body as a whole, 4%.
Okay.
You take that 4%, you multiply it by 450, all right? That's 18 weeks of benefits. You multiply that by what their temporary total disability rate was when they were off work. So let's make it easy. You have a $600 a week job, 2/3 of that's $400. Your settlement's going to be 400 times 18 weeks, or $7,200. Now, that's
Settlement for
it.
what? And you can't work anymore? You can't work
No,
anymore?
you can work. You can continue to work, but that's what your settlement is for that particular injury. Now, before, all right, before July 1st of 2014, it used to be you could take that same 4% and use multipliers up to 6 times. Okay, so you could take that 4%, multiply that by 6, and that'd be 24% times, at that time, 400 weeks, multiplied by your compensation rate. Now you can see, you're probably beginning to see now, that the settlements are a lot lower than they were in 2013.
Now, doesn't a lawyer take a percentage of the workman's comp?
Right.
This is 1/3 like usual? Or
20%.
20%?
By law and by statute, we are only allowed to take 20% of whatever the settlement is.
So if the settlement's $10,000, you take 20% of that?
$2,000.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Plus any expenses.
What about loss of limb, loss of arm, loss of leg, or
Well,
loss of use of the leg? Or
again, the doctor has to take that loss of limb and multiply it. I take it, let's say it's an arm or something, and it's 25% to that part of the body, and it converts it to the body as a whole, and let's say that conversion's 13%.
I got you. Just
Okay.
a figure for me. What about a little toe, something like that?
Little toe, again, you take the little toe, you determine what that is.
What do they rate eyesight?
Eyesight has another rating. How do they do it? The doctors have their own formula for that too. So I mean, eyesight, hearing, everything has a rating. Okay, everything's going to have a rating. It's just going to depend upon,
Now, do you have to go to workman's comp if it is negligence?
Well, that's a good question, because if let's say there could be negligence and a workers' comp case.
Right.
Let me tell you how that would work. Let's suppose you're at work and you work for, I'm going to use a department store, XYZ department store.
I do work for XYZ department.
All right, XYZ department store. And you're at work and you slip and fall, okay, and you break your leg. But it turns out that ABC, janitorial service, was the party who was responsible for, cleaning the floor. Well, you have a workers' comp case against your department store, and you have a negligence case against your ABC. So you can have two for the price of one. In a
And
sense.
you can collect them both.
Yes.
Well, can you have can you have workers' comp against ABC department store and say ABC was not the janitorialist, but ABC did, was cleaning the thing?
Yeah. Well, how it would work would be this: if I had my case against my employer, I would file my claim with my employer. I would file a claim against ABC. The first thing I want to do is settle my workers' compensation case, and the reason for that is because
They'll determine the facts and the guilt and all that
well,
stuff.
well, no,
Well, the extent of the
the
injuries.
importance of that is this: once I settle that case, I kind of know how much I'm going to have to pay back the workers' compensation insurance company because they have something called subrogation against the negligent party, the janitorial service. So let's say you get $20,000.
Oh, I see that.
You see? Let's say you get $20,000.
Right, you have to-
Let's say you had $10,000 in medical expense, okay?
Right.
That's $30,000 that the workers' comp carriers put out. Let's say you get $60,000 in a settlement against the other company. Well, you got to pay back the workers' comp carrier $30,000. Now, as a practical matter, you usually are going to work a reduction with the workers' compensation carrier. They'll usually take off I can't say this all the time, but many times they'll take off a third. So that leaves more money in the pocket of the injured person.
Right.
So that's how that works. One of the other things that changed in workers' comp was how we determine where we go to court, and that depends on where you live. There are 8 divisions. Okay, the first thing I have to do, if I'm going to be denied my claim, or if there's going to be some problem with the claim somewhere along the way, I don't file a complaint anymore in a court, because remember I said the state courts are out.
Right.
I file what's called a petition for benefit determination, and I file that in one of the 8 locations depending upon where I live. That case then gets assigned to a mediator. The mediator gets the parties on the phone and says, hey, look, can we work this out? If we can work it out, all the better. If not, then the mediator will do or draft something called a dispute certification notice, or a DCN as we call it now. And in that DCN, both parties have to lay out everything that they're claiming. Because if they don't, then you may have waived your right to that, okay? So in a situation where, let's use your horseplay situation, if the insurance company is going to say, well, one of our defenses is horseplay, well, they better darn well say that in that dispute certification notice, or they run the risk of not being able to bring it up at a hearing.
Right. Well, I forgot my question. It was a good one, though.
Well, I'll fill in some blanks. Let's fill in some more blanks.
Okay.
You have the choice of having what's called an expedited hearing or a compensation hearing. Now, most of the time, these folks aren't going to be getting their benefits, and that's why you file a petition for benefit determination. That's why the dispute certification notice is filed. And then you ask for an expedited hearing because you want a judge to make a determination quick as to whether or not this person's entitled to these benefits. Right. That hearing is held before one of the 12 judges, okay? And that judge makes a written ruling usually within 10 days to 2 weeks of the hearing. If either party loses, either party has the right to appeal that to what's called the appeals board, all right? And the appeals board can then determine whether or not the trial judge was right or the trial judge was wrong. It can remand it back, or it can affirm it, it can modify it, it can do whatever.
I remember my question.
Go ahead.
When you have a personal injury case, they last a long time. They usually last a pretty long time sometimes.
Right.
And the guy, the person who's injured, the other side might monitor to see how they're really doing.
Right.
They pretend to he says, I'm really injured, but meanwhile they got video of him, playing basketball or something like that.
Right.
In a workman's comp case, is the same thing going on?
Well,
Do they look at your injury and then look at the actions of the supposed injured person?
sure. Some will use surveillance. Some insurance companies will use surveillance to see whether or not this person's really injured. Okay, the good hard-nosed insurance companies, the good hard-nosed lawyers are going to use surveillance, especially if they really don't believe the person's story. Okay, that's certainly can be used both in personal injury cases and in workers' compensation cases.
Right.
The life of a workers' compensation case, generally speaking, is shorter than the life of a personal injury case.
What is an average case?
It can be anywhere from 3 to 4 months to maybe a year, maybe a little bit longer. Now, there are exceptions, because I'm fighting one right now that's 2 years old, and we're still fighting.
Right.
So because it's been twice to the trial level, once to the appeals board, and now it's going back to the trial level again, and it's taken almost 2 years. So
Okay, how about minor injuries? I know somebody who was working in a factory or something like that, and they really skinned their elbow. I mean, they really hurt their elbow, and but didn't break anything. But the whole skin was coming off. Is that a workman's comp claim?
sure, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have the right under workers'
Now,
comp.
is that going to affect his job? Are they going to try to fire him because of that? Or?
Well, they shouldn't, because if you use your workers' compensation benefits and you can prove that you've been fired for that, then that's called a retaliatory discharge.
Right.
And then you have another claim, which is a whole lot better than your
Right.
workers' compensation claim. I'll
Right.
tell you that for sure. But yeah, skin.
You skin your elbow, and so they would generally. What do you do in that case? Go to your boss and say,
Send me to Concentra. Send me to the U.S. Health Works. Let me get some stitches, or let me get it cleaned off, or whatever.
But there's something you can do. You can't just.
Well, sure. But I mean, that really doesn't amount to anything. Okay. I mean, we're talking about cases involving herniation, muscle strains,
Right.
breaks, fractures. Those are the more serious kinds.
It
of
seems like
cases.
workers' comp doesn't pay very much.
It's very, very. It's a system that's changed a great deal. I mean, if I had a chart, I could just show you the difference in a settlement.
Yeah.
That same 4% now would have been. Well, let's just take numbers. 4% times 450 weeks, 18 weeks times the $400 comp rate, $7,200. Let's go back before July 1st, 2014. That same 4% could be multiplied by up to 6 times. That would be 24%. At that time, you used 400 weeks. That would be, I think, 96 weeks multiplied by your compensation rate. Again, $400. 96 times 400, what's that? $36,000. So you see the difference in what's happened when this new law was passed. And it was passed, when Governor Haslam took over in 2014. And then the reason for it was obvious: for business. It was business friendly, reduce premiums for businesses, and I have a little bias: break the backs of the Tennessee worker. That's.
I should get together with Cameron. He's a union guy.
Well, as a matter of fact, this book, the Tennessee Workers' Compensation Handbook, was kind of born out of a desire for the union to have something to look at. I go Thursday once a month.
Is there a difference when it's a Kroger's who has a union versus anybody else?
No, well, no, but I will say this: most union folks, I can't say all, I'm not going to say all, most union folks have a fairly good wage, okay? And that's going to make a big difference in their settlement. But going back to what I was saying, every third Thursday of the month at Piccadilly Cafeteria, the Labor Council meets, and members of the different unions get together and have lunch. And I started going because I wanted to meet people. I wanted to maybe get some business that way. And one of the things they were all coming up to me and interested in, workers' comp, workers' comp. So I said, these folks, they really want to know about this stuff. Why don't I write a book?
Right.
Why don't I educate them? So this thing came out about a month or two ago.
Now these things are given at your law. Anybody who wants them, right?
Anybody in our law office, anybody who comes to our office can pick one up.
Written by James Flexer and Steve Karr.
Right. And anybody who wants to call the office and
Where are
pick
you
one up,
located?
we're at 1900 Church Street. We're on the 4th floor. The phone number is 615-255-2893. If you want a book, all you have to do is call, or you can go onto the website.
We'll put your website up on the screen.
Which is flexerlaw.com.
Right.
And you can
And you get
order a
these
book.
other books too.
Sure, the other books are there
So we
too.
go really quick. We're running out of time here, but you have a book on personal injury
Yeah.
that I read too. See, I did 2 years of personal injury. Let's get this personal injury book.
That's the Personal Injury Handbook, which we put out July 2000. I want to say it's July 2016. So that's almost 2 years old. It's 2 years old now, that book.
It's a good book. I mean, I never did workers' comp. I mean, I did a lot of personal injury,
Right.
so
Right.
I related to it a lot more. I said, oh, I know that, I know that, I know that. And we have this other one, which we haven't even talked about, Tennessee Motorcycle Handbook.
Yeah, that was kind of a fun book. I don't ride motorcycles, but
The other guy
my
wrote-
colleague Jeff
right,
Levine
right, he wrote-
rides.
I think I spoke with him on the phone.
Okay, so we wanted to do a book with respect to motorcycles, talk about DUI, talk about weapons, carrying a weapon, talking about the rules of the road, talking about how what you're supposed to do, what kind of equipment you're supposed to wear, what kind of equipment should you have in your motorcycle, and that sort of thing.
And all these books are free.
They're all free.
They're all free.
All
And they're
free.
good guides.
They're
They're good guides. Free is always good.
Free is good.
Free is
Free
good.
is good. Absolutely.
Right.
So,
Anyway, we got about a minute left, so any more words of wisdom?
yeah, I would say to the viewing audience out there that if you get hurt on the job, the first thing you want to do is not call a lawyer. You want to notify your supervisor that you got hurt. You want to make sure you get a doctor. You want to make sure that you have them fill out a claim because you want to be of record, and that's very important. And the other thing is, if you've ever had any prior injuries, make sure you tell your doctor, I've had prior injuries to this part of my body. That's very important. An honest history makes for a very much cleaner claim.
A prior injury would affect it how?
Only to the extent that if the doctor understands that you've had a prior injury, he can say that it may aggravate or exacerbate a pre-existing condition, which is still compensable.
Right. You take your victims as you find them.
Pretty
right?
much.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Anyway, we've got to get going. My guest has been Steve Karr. What's the D stand for?
David.
Steve
Yeah,
David Karr.
Right.
From Flexer Law.
Flexer Law.
And we'll be back next week with another edition of the show.
Thanks a lot.
It's a rough life living up to Lassie. It's a rough life trying to be so classy when I'm going through the garbage.